Welcome to Show Me the Proof, Get to the Point, the B2B marketing podcast where we show you the proof in the form of case studies and success stories. And we get straight to the point with your hosts and founders of Proofpoint Marketing, Mike and Gabby Grinberg.
Today, we are excited to have Jason Bradwell with us on the show, and he is our first guest from across the pond. Jason is a senior marketing director for a global enterprise technology brand. He's on a mission to prove B2B doesn't have to be boring with his podcast, B2B Better, which I love that name, and his weekly newsletter, the B2B Bite. Jason, welcome to have you. Tell us a little bit about Deltatre and what you're doing there specifically.
Well, thanks very much for having me, guys. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. As you mentioned, I am the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Deltatre. Deltatre is a global B2B technology company that is behind many of the technological products and solutions that are delivered by the sport and media brands that we all know and love. Some of our customers include Major League Baseball, National Football League, UEFA, FIFA, and hundreds of others. We like to say that we are the industry's best kept secret, in that we have been around for about 35 years. But unless you work in the kind of the B2B side of media and sport technology, you'll have never heard of us. If you were to pull the plug on Deltatre, the world of sport media and entertainment as you know it would probably go dark for a little while. We do everything from putting cameras into stadiums to measure, where players are on the field and kind of track where the ball's going, to doing online and broadcast TV graphics, to building websites and apps for these media properties, streaming OTT services, and strategic consultancy, and kind of everything in between. If it's anything to do with getting content from where it's being created and into the hands of a fan, Deltatre likely will have a hand in it. So, and my role specifically within Deltatre is primarily kind of content marketing, PR and communications, digital marketing, and product marketing. I've got a fantastic team who work really, really hard that look after those four areas of the business.
Please don't pull the plug on Deltatre because, especially now with COVID, people might go completely nuts if they can't watch sports. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was a little bit hairy last year when the pandemic struck, but the industry is incredibly resilient, and it's seen a lot of transformation in the last 12 months that was happening in terms of how kind of sport media entertainment is produced and distributed, but it was just greatly accelerated because it had to be, and very fortunate to see a lot of amazing transformation in the space right now.
That is fantastic. And it's an area of sports and sports marketing that I think you're right, Jason. A lot of people don't think about that. If you're a sports enthusiast, you care about the game. You want to see the game. You want to see your players out there on the pitch and kicking the ball or throwing the ball, depending on the sport. But you don't really think about the technology that powers that and that kind of goes beyond that, which is actually quite fascinating. Not to stir the conversation too far off base, but my dad is a big fan of the EPL, and he's constantly amazed at how the technology has changed. He was a soccer player, he was a coach, he played, minor league stuff, not major, of course. But that's one of the things that he always zones in on is, oh, look, they're going to do the replay, and oh, the video camera's there, and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating part of the sport that I'm very excited to hear more about from Deltatre. And I know that you have a wonderful case study that you're going to share with us today. And it's about podcasting, which is very meta because we're on a podcast and we're going to talk about podcasting. So let's dig right in. Tell us about this case study that you have for us today, Jason.
Absolutely. So, being B2B marketers, one of the bread and butter pieces of content marketing that we can do is the creation of client testimonials in the form of case studies, right? You go to any B2B company's website that's, worth its weight in salt, and you will see a case study or a testimonial sitting on the homepage talking about how great that company is and how it's helped that customer solve a problem. And I think that's absolutely right. There's a lot of data out there to suggest that, B2B buyers who, are putting a lot of money on the line in order to bring in a solution, relatively more than you would be as a consumer. And then in turn, putting effectively their job on the line, because if you're talking about a multi-million-dollar contract that you get wrong, that's very different to buying a chocolate bar you don't like and throwing it away and no one's ever going to hear about it. They want proof that someone has trodden the path before them, one of their contemporaries, one of their competitors, one of their peers in the space. And that's why client testimonials are so effective for B2B companies like Deltatre and others. What you sometimes find in certain B2B industries is that securing that testimonial is not as easy as just asking the customer and getting on and creating the content, right? That's the fun part. When you're working in industries like sports, where sport properties, rights owners and rights holders are being paid by brands to sponsor that sport property, to pay for the right to have that association. From the sport rights owner, rights holder point of view, why would they give one of their tech vendors who they're paying, for a technology solution, the right to go out and use their name and likeness in order to promote that technology vendor's services? And it's totally right, and it totally makes sense, and it's absolutely fair. You see the same in kind of government work as well. Governments, government bodies don't want people to know who they're working with, and this is a problem that's shared in a lot of different industries. So then, as a B2B marketer, you're kind of faced with a little bit of a conundrum, because
I'd say.
Right. We talked about Deltatre being the industry's best kept secret. If we could go out and we could talk about all these amazing clients that we work with and what we do, it would be the easiest job in the world for me. I always say that, because the caliber of clients that we work with and what they're doing in the space is phenomenal. But as I mentioned, a lot of companies are paying a lot of money for the rights to go out and make that association. So we're faced with a conundrum. How do we build that social proof? How do we build credibility? And how do we build trust with our potential buyers that Deltatre has delivered a large scale solution of the type they're looking for in the past, without a kind of conventional case study? So one of the things that we did here at Deltatre is that we looked at a podcast, which we launched at the tail end of 2020, called Feel to Fan. And Feel to Fan is around a 30 to 45 minute podcast that I host with technology partners and brands and rights holders and rights owners in our space. And we talk about what's happening in the industry. And we found that a very effective tool for us to at least start a conversation with some of our clients who previously had closed the door on any kind of co-marketing activities, to at least appear with us in a public setting to, talk about what we're seeing in the space. And, that was great for us, because it meant that we could build that association with some of our clients and partners in the space who previously didn't want to, couldn't, their hands were tied commercially, to make that kind of public association, because we flipped it on its head. We made it not about us, hey, come and tell our story, Deltatra's story, and how we've helped you, but come and tell us about what you're doing and what you're seeing in the space and how you're transforming the industry. And we benefit as Deltatre from that halo effect. We are proving to the market that we are a big player. We can pull the likes of Juventus, this, top tier Italian football team. We can get their chief commercial officer to come and speak with us on the podcast about what he's seeing in the industry. We can get SailGP, this amazing up and coming, sailing league and federation, to come and talk about how they're using technology to reach a new audience segment who previously had nothing to do with sailing, had never been on a boat. So yeah, we benefited from the halo effect there.
So my question is this, as you're on the podcast with your clients, with these big world-class leaders in the sports industry, have they said anything about their experience with Deltatre on Unprovoked?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be clear, this is not a case of us trying to hoodwink anyone into doing something they don't want to do or they can't commercially do, right? We don't do this in order to to get them talking about our commercial relationship. That is absolutely not the intent. However, there has been occasions when we have done episodes where, to a high level degree, the commercial relationship, shared between the two clients has been disclosed in a very kind of comfortable and unprovoked way. Because sometimes, when you're in situations where you're making a formal request for a case study and for a testimonial, which is kind of being run up the flagpole to a legal team or, someone who perhaps doesn't truly within the organization understand the mutual benefit in both companies having a public relationship with one another, things can get tied up. And, when you're in the throes of delivering a project and, things aren't, going, every project has project fires, things are a little bit heated, asking for that kind of permission can sometimes be used as leverage. But when you're in a kind of more comfortable discussion about the industry type of context where there is no pressure to go about and, publicly disclose a relationship. There have been instances, and I've seen this with other companies out in the market, that the nature of that relationship just is naturally, revealed. But then, we have an obligation as a client, towards our clients, in order to give them the opportunity to listen to the podcast and to raise any red flags before it is published. The last thing we want to do is, or the last thing anyone wants to do is, cause anyone that's paying them to have a red face. So, we make it a standard practice that, no content, and this is beyond just podcasts, any content that is to do with our clients has to go through multiple rounds of reviews on both sides. And, everything needs to be squared away before anything is published. And I think that's the right way of going about it.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you shared that bit with us because I think that's very important, especially when you have such high profile clients, but really any client that is paying for you, that you're going to be putting something together and having their name associated with it. It's very important that they have that stamp of approval. So good on you for doing that extra due diligence, which I'm sure increases your production time just a little bit, but it is a necessary step.
It does increase the production time, but I would rather I'd rather the production take an extra week or two and not have to kind of backtrack anything or explain to a higher up why something happened. We have an obligation. Every marketer has an obligation to the people that they are looping in into their content production to make sure everyone is comfortable before something goes out. So that review process is also something I carry out with my own personal podcast and newsletter. Mm-hmm. If I'm interviewing someone and I'm using one of their quotes, I want to make sure they're happy with that attribution before anything goes out. That relationship is too important to tarnish.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So the show is called Show Me the Proof, Get to the Point. So I'd love to ask, so you've been running this podcast for how long now?
We've been running it since, I'd say, end of Q3 of 2020, okay. Possibly a little earlier than that.
So about 9 months.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So what's been the impact? Like what's been the result of running this? What has it given you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the success of these kind of things. The success of these kind of things depends on the lens through which you're looking at them. We always set out with the podcast with the ambition not to compete with the trade publications, editorial publications in our space, whose day job it is to create newsworthy content, right? And they have the resources to kind of facilitate that. So we're not judging it on the number of listens we get. We're judging it on what caliber of clients can we get, or sometimes not even clients, sometimes just interesting companies from the space who we would like to be clients at some point. So we judge it really on the caliber of guests that we're able to secure, because, as I said, right at the beginning of this, developing that public relationship and benefiting from that kind of perceived halo effect is what's important to us. So looking at it through that lens, as I mentioned, we have had the likes of Juventus on the podcast, Sail GP, Malaysia Basketball Association, and just companies that are at the top of their game in their respective sports. In geographically speaking, a pretty broad range of right owners and right holders from across the world, and those are associations that prior to the podcast, were difficult to come by in the form of a conventional kind of case study, white paper, things like that. So yeah, if you're looking at it at the caliber of the guests that we've secured, I'd say we've had a pretty good run of it so far.
So talk about how are you able to sell this up to leadership? In terms of, hey, let's start a podcast and we're going to measure it based on quality of guests.
That was the question that was in my mind, actually. I was going to ask that very same thing, and more about, I like Mike's angle, but I'd also like to see, Jason, if you can speak about the angle of, you touched on this earlier. You said, hey, we're kind of in a crowded space, right? There's the sports teams themselves have a tremendous PR and press machine and social media. Then you have the trade publications. Then you have TV, and you have Netflix, and you have all these very established mediums and media that are putting out content related to your industry. So I'd love to know, like what Mike said, how did you sell this up? And really flip the narrative with your leadership about, hey, we're not going to measure necessarily sales attributed to this, but more so caliber of guests. And then also maybe if you could speak to if there was any friction on the fact that you're kind of entering a very crowded space already for this type of content.
Yes, it's an interesting question. I would kind of say that the space isn't too crowded, at least when you're looking at it from the point of view of, are any of our competitors doing this? And that's something that I feel quite passionate and strongly about, particularly with teams, that are a little bit on the smaller side, or perhaps, having to kind of really consider their budget and resources, how they spend those. You want to obviously be where your customers are with the content that you're creating, but I also think that there is huge value in being a big fish in a small pond, looking at channels where none of your competitors or contemporaries are creating any content, and there is a gap there. So yeah, from a media point of view, there are a lot of kind of trade podcasts that serve the sport and entertainment markets. That's true, but there are no podcasts out there that are being delivered by a company that can look under the hood of the sport media entertainment technology machine in a way that Deltatre can. And I think that is quite a unique angle for us. So, when we were pitching this idea to our leadership team and up to my boss, our chief brand officer, I was trying to kind of convey this sense of, there's a lot of content out there, but that's the same in every industry. What there isn't at the moment is a podcast that's being delivered by a company like Deltatre that has such a unique view on the industry just by virtue of who it's working with and the types of products and services it's delivering. And there's an opportunity there. When a client is talking to a trade publication, typically, they're looking at it from a very kind of high level strategic point of view to kind of, justify their decision making. As a technology company, we're able to kind of go a little bit more into the weeds and perhaps get a slightly more authentic interview than a well well-versed executive from their PR team is perhaps giving to some of the journalists in the industry, where they've got to watch what they say. So when we were pitching it to our leadership team, it was a case of, this is a new channel. It's worth exploring by virtue of that. We're not going to have too much competition from our competitors. No one else is doing the podcast. And also, let's start small. I think we got a little bit hung up at the beginning that we were talking about getting a professional studio and hiring a professional presenter, and really kind of going, full hog on making it a professional production. COVID hit, so then we weren't able to go into a professional studio, and we just thought, you know what, it is better to get something out than nothing out. And if that means that Jason's got to get up and do the presenting, then so be it. And so far it's turned out okay. And, we were able to get 4 or 5 episodes under our belt on a very minimum budget with, relatively minimal effort. It was just a case of reaching out to some clients and partners with questions, getting on the phone for an hour, recording it, putting a sting on either side and publishing it. And we were able to turn around and say, you know what, we were able to get, 4 or 5 clients that otherwise didn't want to, or partners or companies that we want to work with that otherwise wouldn't have done anything with us, to speak with us on the podcast. And that's a win for us. So
I'm kind of curious whether your background in theater and journalism had helped you sort of get into the podcast host chair, if you will.
Yeah, I studied theater. That was my university degree. Cost me a cool $30,000 for the certificate that hangs on my wall. And I often try and find the kind of the strings of justification, of why it was worthwhile.
Well, you're welcome. Here's another one.
Yeah, here's another one. Yeah. So I met my wife during my degree, so that's always my kind of trump card. Whenever I think of, was it worth it? But yeah, I like to say that all marketers should take an improv class, because I feel a lot of the skills that you pick up from performance can carry over and be transferable into a marketing career. Sadly, I don't perform anymore, but I look back at my degree and the time I spent acting and directing and all that kind of stuff, and it taught me to be scrappy and be resilient and confident. I remember doing kind of one-man shows in front of like 150 people, and if you can do that, you can get up in front of a C-suite and say, look, I've got an idea, and there's a reason for us to try it, and I'll do it on a low budget, and here is what I expect to get out of it, and I'm going to show you some results, and if I don't, I've got 100 other ideas that we could pursue. So yeah, I think every marketer would benefit from dipping their toes into performance in some way or another.
Was there something that you learned about doing this? You mentioned that you started the podcast during the pandemic, so during lockdown. It was on a shoestring budget, very modest budget. What was something that you learned that you weren't expecting to learn about podcasting, or something unexpected that came about that sort of opened your eyes to what you were doing?
It's a good question. I think depending on how you like to prepare for these things, one thing, when I kind of went into doing the podcast, and this is the same with my own podcast, B2B Better, I like to go in very prepared. And it was the same back in my acting days. I would make copious notes on scripts, and, go over lines over and over and over and over again. I wanted to know exactly what I wanted to say before I got up on stage. And it was the same with the podcast. I'd write 20 questions, and then each question would have maybe 3 or 4 sub questions that I'm trying to think like every avenue that this conversation could go down. So I was prepared. And what I ended up finding was that actually having a guideline of what you want to talk about is incredibly important, but you've just got to let the conversation flow. And that's what it's got to be. It's got the best podcasts, in my opinion, are the ones that are more conversational. And, they have a structure, because, without structure, it's chaos, but you're letting the conversation flow in the way it wants to flow. And it's okay if it goes off in a new, unexpected, exciting direction. Don't try and force it back onto the road that you've tried to pay for yourself if it doesn't naturally come back anyway. Just let it play out, and the content that you get at the end will be great. And if it doesn't, you'll fix it in post.
Well, this is podcasting gold right here. So everybody listening, you've heard it first from Jason Bradwell. It's about the conversation. It's about the flow. And really, at the end of the day, what you're saying is don't over-prepare, right? Be prepared, but don't be over-prepared. Let your guests do the talking. And I'm saying this as I'm doing the talking here, but I wanted to reiterate that great point. If you would, to get to the point on how did you create your podcast from field to fan?
Field to fan.
And to add to that also is, how did you promote it? How did you get it out there, both in front of listeners and prospective guests?
Yeah. It was a fairly straightforward process. Like I said, a moment ago, I think podcasts can be very well highly produced pieces of content where you get professional grade recording equipment, editing equipment. You build the booth around you that's going to make the audio quality crystal clear and optimized. And we just found ourselves in a situation where we just weren't able to do that. Particularly, it was a new idea. It was a fairly obscure idea for B2B companies of our type and in our industry, and we didn't want to go out and make a huge investment and then see that wasted. We wanted to validate the idea first. So it simply was a case of getting a couple of microphones for me and our producer, a guy called Marco on our team. Actually, the microphone I'm recording on now, and we simply recorded on Zoom for a while, and we're able to kind of split the audio tracks. We use to edit it. We use, I believe we use GarageBand to pull it together. I'm fortunate that one of my colleagues actually does that part. I focus on the interview, and he focuses on the kind of editing and pulling it together. But we simply use GarageBand, which is obviously free software with every Mac and MacBook, and we distribute it via Buzzsprout, I think, is our hosting platform, which is where you plug in the episode and it just once you publish it, it fires out to all of the directories: Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon, etc. So it's a pretty lean operation, and does not require that much kind of maintenance or cost, which is super important for us. In terms of how we promote it, we're big advocates. I'm a big advocate as well of kind of repurposing content, particularly kind of what I consider to be hero content, where we are spending a fair deal of time and energy in pulling together, a kind of central asset. So, we get the podcast. Once it's completed, we share it with our clients and our sales team so that they can distribute it across their own personal channels. We publish it across Deltatra's brand channels, as you'd expect. LinkedIn, Twitter. We put it on our blog, but then we look at what can we do with that asset, right? To make it work a little bit harder for us. And I love podcasts because they just naturally lend themselves to being kind of cut up, sliced and diced and used in different ways. You can export the transcript. There are tools like Zoom does that. Zoom will publish a transcript for you if you record the your video call. But there are other tools like Trint, TRINT, that you can also throw an audio file into, and that will pump out a transcript. And with a little bit of work, that can be made into a blog post. If anything, it can you throw some timestamps on there, and you've got a ready-made piece of content. Then you can also cut up specific audio clips. Buzzsprout, the hosting platform I mentioned, has this as a feature. You can, within the tool, pick, between in a 60-second snippet, which then it will cut for you, and it will put on kind of a tile for you that you can then publish on social media. So yeah, there's lots of great ways that you can kind of slice and dice this kind of one audio asset, throw it on your YouTube channel, that just make it work harder for you than just creating it, publishing it once, and then letting it fall to the wayside there. So yeah.
Are you doing any, or have you done any paid promotion for it?
We haven't done.
That have come out of it.
We haven't done any paid promotion of it yet. No. To be honest, we spend a lot of time trying to build up our organic audience, and we're pretty selective in kind of where we are, putting paid advertising. It's primarily, when we do it, it's primarily on your kind of bottom of the funnel, high intent pieces of content. But otherwise, yeah, we kind of publish it just organically across our channels.
And Jason, I don't know if this is, hopefully this is a question you can answer. From the podcast, which you've now been recording for about 9 months, has it allowed your company to secure any new clients, or at least get in front of some leads that were maybe had gone cold, or prospects that were not engaged? Has there been any impact to, let's say, as we say here, impact to the bottom line?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wouldn't be able to disclose, obviously, if we've secured any specific clients off the back of it, but I can give you a story that talks a little bit to this point. Events have always been the spine of our marketing strategy. We are a company, like many in our space, that operate across long sales cycles, and getting that kind of face-to-face opportunity with our clients is always important. And 2020 put a break on that, like it did for everybody. So we worked with a lot of our regular event partners last year on digital equivalent events. And there was one event who approached us, and they said, "We've got a novel idea for you. We want to run a pop-up channel that you will own, that will run alongside the main agenda of our event, of our digital event. It's 3.5 hours worth of time. Fill it with whatever you want. We will do all the kind of promotion. We'll host it on our platform. You'll be sitting on the agenda. We'll publish it on social and all that kind of stuff. We'll do the promotion. But in terms of actually the content itself, that's on you. You fill that time with whatever you've got." And we were daunted, I'll be honest, by the prospect. We didn't have to do it, but we took it on because we thought it was an interesting challenge. Because, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, it's hard enough getting one client to agree to do something with you. Trying to get multiple clients to fill 3.5 hours worth of time is another problem entirely. But we took it on. And I'd say that due to the fact that we had already established the podcast and had built relationships, within marketing had built relationships with, these individuals within our industry that the industry wanted to hear from, we were in a much stronger position to approach them and say, "Hey, you came on the podcast, or we've been talking about the podcast. You seem up for it. How about you come and, you run a session with us on this pop-up channel for half an hour or so." And credit and kudos to my team, who were absolutely central to pulling this all together. We had managed to fix the agenda within about 2 weeks, which was unheard of for that kind of thing for us in the past, because we had built those relationships, I'd say, through the podcast. And off the back of that event, we were able to net, 100 or so, high quality premium leads of people who had tuned in to, watch our kind of sessions as part of that pop-up event. And then, because we made the content and we own the content, we repurposed some of it and we made them into podcast episodes for our podcast. So we just ripped the audio. I did a short little kind of intro outro where I was like, this is the audio from this interview I did at this event, and now it's in podcast form, and we've just picked the best parts, and there you go, another piece of content that's been reused and repurposed. So yeah, it was kind of like a self-fulfilling wheel.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome, because I think that's the one thing that people often forget, is everybody's so focused on the lead aspect, where the process of, this is a framework and a place to create and build those relationships. It can lead to business. It can also lead to more and better content, which then leads to business, right? So yes, it's obviously good luck with the attribution of that one, but then on the other side, there's no way you would have gotten it, it sounds like, without have this built up equity in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think equity is the totally the right word. And within our team, we talk a lot about building up brand equity, and this attribution question is always one that inevitably will come up. How is what you're doing here hitting the bottom line at some point in the future? And I think the smart B2B brands today are the ones that are saying, well, you know what, there are kind of two parts of the marketing, part of the marketing function. One is demand generation and capitalizing on that in-market demand today. And another is brand building, which is not going to necessarily deliver financial revenue results today, but over the long term is going to allow you to capitalize on out of market demand today. It's going to allow you to increase your pricing power. It's going to help you recruit better talent. It's going to give you potentially better exit strength, if that's kind of the way the business is going. So, with things like podcasts, if you have a company that is receptive to this argument and this idea, I would be pitching it as, look, we may not be able to prove that, after doing a podcast episode next week, we've got X amount of business off it, but it's us investing in our brand equity for the long term.
I love that
answer. Do you track anything like even as simple as like pre and post, pre-podcast launch to now, like impact on brand search traffic or anything like that? And have you seen any impact on that?
No, I'll be honest, we haven't. This has been a fairly kind of scrappy project amongst many scrappy projects. 2020 meant that we had to, like a lot of enterprise B2B companies that do rely on events, reevaluate our approach to marketing and adopt more of a digital first approach. So to answer that specific question, no, but it is something that we are considering moving forward as we build out our digital ecosystem.
Yes. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, I think for me, I love that what you just described, which is really, the two sides of the marketing coin. You have the demand side, and then you have sort of the brand, and I would maybe even add the goodwill side of the company. What are you doing to show your brand, so the goodwill, besides demand. So I love that. It sounds like this podcast has allowed you to do both of those things, maybe one indirectly, one more directly, and over time, the coin will continue to toss and turn as the podcast gets more listeners, and as you bring on more guests and more high-powered guests, and most importantly, the kinds of guests that you would like to eventually do business with. But the most important thing that I think you said is this idea of goodwill. And showing the brand and doing it in a way that, as you referenced earlier on the call, that puts your clients and your prospects in the best light possible, and doing it with their best intentions in mind. And I think also one thing that you said, Jason, that is very key to podcasting is that you were very specific on your intent when you started. And it was really about highlighting your partners, highlighting people and giving them a platform to show off kind of their stuff, and really minimizing in the background Deltatre. But nevertheless, it's always sort of this thread that's carried throughout. So thank you so much for this enlightening conversation and what you've done and how you broke it down. You've showed us the proof. You took us to the point. I think it's now time for our lightning round. What do you say, Mike?
I think that sounds about right.
I'm a little bit scared.
These shouldn't be, these will be fun, I think.
Okay. What's your blood type? I have no idea.
What's that?
Don't ask. What's your blood type? I have no idea.
You know what? You would have gotten me on that one too. I don't know. Which is kind of bad if you think about it. Yeah, so, all right, let's kick this off. So what's the main KPI you use to evaluate marketing success?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think for us, it's marketing qualified leads, because at the end of the day, marketing is there to help deliver revenue. So yeah, I'd go with marketing qualified leads in our case.
What's a new marketing strategy or tactic that you're looking forward to testing out this year?
Clubhouse.
All
Clubhouse. Yeah. I think I wrote a piece about this last couple of weeks ago. I think there is a lot of opportunity potentially in Clubhouse, but maybe more Twitter Spaces when that rolls out more widely across the platform. But I mean, as marketers, what more could you want in terms of a way to have an authentic, real conversation with your customers in your market than something like Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually, we're Android users over here. We purchased an iPad just to be able to get on the Clubhouse. We have not actually taken advantage of that just yet. We got to get on that.
That's funny.
What's your least favorite business word or phrase?
Ooh, move the needle. And I say it so often. And that's what really annoys me. Like, I really don't like it as a phrase. I just think it sounds very Wall Streety, kind of like, Wolf of Wall Street type thing. And yeah, I really don't like it, but I have on occasion let it slip out of my mouth in conversation.
I think we've all been there for sure.
It's like when you're saying something and you're just like, the best way to describe this right now is move the needle. And I don't want to say it, but I can't think of anything else quick enough. So, move the needle, I guess.
It's kind of like the word synergy. Every once in a while it pops out and you're like, oh God. I just had
to say it. Yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite podcast?
Oh man, my favorite podcast is, there's a great podcast which is a little, it's to do with marketing, but not B2B necessarily, called Making the Brand by Brianne Fleming, who is a great community builder on Twitter. I believe she is a lecturer at the University of Florida, and her whole thing is, the convergence of pop culture and marketing. And she's a 90s kid like me, and uses a lot of the amazing kind of pop culture references from that era to teach marketing lessons. And I love what she does on her podcast and on Twitter and her newsletter and everything she does. I think it's great.
That sounds
awesome.
That sounds like a fun one. All right, so I threw this one, Mike. You're skipping over my bonus questions. Oh. All right. Well, then, all right. So
we might be looking at a different document.
You're looking at a different document. Yeah. So as a theater major,
yes.
What is your favorite Shakespearean play?
Julius Caesar.
That's not one you hear quite often.
No, Julius Caesar. I've always been fascinated with kind of ancient Rome and ancient Greece as just a historical period. And I was fortunate in my during my degree to be given the opportunity to direct Julius Caesar at the theater in Winchester, and it was my first ever opportunity to kind of run something like as the leader, and I put my heart and soul into it, and two of my lead actors were given awards off the back of it, which made me feel really proud. And both of them actually have gone on to become full-time professional performers. Now I'm not attributing what they did for Julius Caesar, like that's why they're doing it, because they're phenomenal in their own rights. But from the time period that it talks about, the story of Julius Caesar, I think is fantastic. And the fact that it was my first real professional production that I was in charge of, it's got a special place in my heart.
Can you give us a line or two from Julius Caesar?
Yeah, the most famous one is "Et tu, Brute?" So when Julius Caesar has unfortunately been taken out by all of the kind of the senators of the day, and his best friend Brutus, has been the ringleader. That was, a very emotional and compelling part of the production for us, because obviously it's like the culmination of the betrayal. So yeah, "Et tu, Brute?" is a famous one.
Absolutely. All right, I had another one that's sort of a bonus question, but then I'll let you get back on the track, Mike. Who is your favorite British band or musician?
Oh man, you caught me here because it sounds bad, but I'm just not too much into music. Okay. But I can think of someone. So like, I do like music. That's incorrect. I just don't have like a particular taste. I have one playlist in Spotify called my ultimate playlist, which is just songs that I like, and I just listen to them over and over and over again. And every time I try and deviate,
same on that boat.
yeah, like movies and TV is more my thing. Like whenever I deviate from that ultimate playlist, I can't get into it, and I end up going back. But the first concert I ever went to was a band called the Hoosiers, who were a British band. They sang Goodbye, Mr. A, I think was their most famous one. And opening for them was an Irish band called The Script. And, we're recording this on St. Patrick's Day, so that's kind of interesting. And then I ended up going to see 10 years later with my now wife. I went to go see The Script at the same place that I saw my first concert. And, that was quite special. So they're just a kind of an Irish indie kind of rock band. They've had a couple of top 10 hits, I think, here in the UK and maybe in the US. But I like them. The Irish, British, kind of the same thing. No, that's not true. I'm gonna get people. I'm gonna get people. I should know better than that. Yeah, cut that out. I should know better than that. I should have said it's close enough. Ireland is close enough to the UK.
Well, most of our listeners are American, so they won't know the difference.
Of Irish heritage, and they're going to come and get me. So please discount that. I did not mean that. I meant it was close to the UK. Not that it is the UK.
The luck of the Irish. They're going to come after you.
Exactly.
Okay,
now the accents start coming out. Yeah.
Say stop while we're ahead, but it's too
I can do a really good Scottish accent, which is quite tricky actually for most Americans. But I won't do it today. You can't do the Scottish accent.
Considering I had a theater major, accents have never been my thing. So I'm not even going to attempt to try and do something like that. But good on you. That's good. All
right. We won't put you on the spot. All right, Mike, you're up.
Well, I guess let's round this off. So going back to the business and marketing stuff, what is your favorite business or marketing book?
My favorite business or marketing book. I mean, there's a couple that I'll just reel off really quickly. So, everyone references Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And I think, that it is good. Sometimes I think it is over recommended, but it is good. I think particularly for companies like Deltatre, which are quite complex in the sense of, we're a big company across a lot of different verticals within our industry. And we need to find a way to kind of distill that story down into a coherent, understandable message. It definitely helped in that regard. There's a new book that I was reading recently called Junior by Tom K. something. I'll send over a link if you want to reference it maybe. And it's just a really kind of interesting look on copywriting and within the kind of advertising industry from a junior's perspective. You see a lot of kind of these agency-esque books that are written by professionals at the top of their career. They've climbed the ladder and they're distilling years of wisdom into a book. Tom took it from the other way of like coming into that industry and into that field. What can you expect? What are some tips and tricks to get ahead? And just preparing you to eat dirt for a while. So that was a really good one. And then one I picked up, which I haven't finished yet, so I will withhold my full endorsement right now, but I've enjoyed what I've seen so far, is The Choice Paradox. The Choice Factory, which is 25 bite-sized chapters on why people make decisions in terms of what they're buying and how they act in that context. And what I like about it is it's just short and it's to the point. Each chapter is only like 3 or 4 pages long. And, I think sometimes I read these kind of marketing books and it kind of goes in one eye and comes out the other. But because it's so concise and to the point and focused, I find it, it imprints better. So very, very kind of accessible look into kind of consumer psychology.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We've loved getting to know the case study, the podcast, learning more about the unique experience that Deltatre offers to sports fan across the world, and specifically what you're doing at Deltatre and what you've done to really advance both the revenue side of marketing and the brand side of marketing at the company. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate first, you guys inviting me onto the podcast. This has been a lot of fun. I love the way that you kind of set up the sections of the podcast. It, keeps things really focused, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. And also I'll just, I don't want it to come across like it's just me doing all of this. I've got a phenomenal team of 9 other amazing individuals that are helping making all this happen. And I'm very proud to work with them. In order to reach me, you can find me on Twitter at Jason R. Bradwell. I'm also on LinkedIn. And yeah, you mentioned it at the beginning, but I host my own B2B podcast called B2B Better, where I interview kind of marketing leaders on a variety of different topics and try and break it down into, kind of accessible, fun-sized chunks. And also, I write a weekly newsletter that covers a lot of the same topics called the B2B Bite. So but Twitter is where I spend too much of my time. So if you want to reach me, that's probably the best place to get me.
Fantastic. Well, our listeners are going to have wonderful ways to follow you and get to know you and continue the dialogue with you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on both your podcasts, as well as the newsletter. So thank you so much, Jason. We've very much enjoyed having you on the show as well.
Thanks for tuning in to the Show Me the Proof, Get to the Point podcast. Join us weekly for new episodes and seriously smart B2B marketing success stories. We'll show you the proof and get to the point every time. Find additional resources on the Proofpoint website, www.proofpoint.marketing, including the full episode library with show notes, guides, templates, and more great resources. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts.